Hey, hey, hey. Welcome to Next Nation. I am your host, Sylvia K. Alston. So, guys, last week we kicked off our official launch for Next Nation, the podcast. And I'm super excited about the feedback and the love and the support and the well wishes and the letters and the emails and the texts and the Facebook messages and posts and DMs on Twitter that I've received about the success and the interviews that we've done thus far. I truly appreciate your support. I love the feedback. One listener sent me a full-on out 2-page letter. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. But I have to tell you that it's been so heartwarming just to see your responses and your support for the next iteration of the show. And I hope to always continue to garner your support, to gain your feedback, to just hear your perspective and your thoughts about the work that we're endeavoring to do with this effort. It's incredibly important to me that what we give you is not necessarily perfection, but that we are bringing you edutainment, right? We want to entertain you. We definitely want to inspire you, but we want to make sure that we're giving you some education and some knowledge and some information that you can kind of grasp onto, and that you are getting an opportunity to hear impactful stories, right? Because one of the mantras of this show is, what's your story? Everybody has one. And I think that that's so important as we continue to develop this brand and as we continue to move forward with this podcast. Everybody has a story. And the sooner we get to start telling them, we can start to carve out our legacy. We can start to heal from the things that we've experienced, and we can start to reshape our narrative, right? And our perspective. And so that's why it's so important to me to have this opportunity and this platform to spend time talking to you about things that matter in my world. And I'm glad that you're grabbing onto it and you're enjoying it. So thank you for all of your support and the well wishes and the sentiments that I received for the launch of the first 3 episodes of the show. And if you've missed any one of them, please check out episodes 1 through 3. So before we move on, I just want to start by saying that, when I launched the show, I launched with 3 episodes, but we had actually taped about 7 or 8 episodes. And I had them in queue. I had them in succession, to play over the coming weeks. And then the world erupted. So on Wednesday, January 6th, while I was sitting in my home office working, it was my first official return to work day. I took some time off at the end of December and the first week of January. And I did that because I just kind of, I always spend the end of the year with family. It's an incredibly emotional time for me. My dad passed in December, and so I traditionally, celebrate the anniversary of his passing with family at the end of December. But at the beginning of January, January is such a month of rebirth and new beginnings, not just because the year changes, but because the year changes. And it's because January 1st is the day that I got married. So my husband and I always do a celebration at the outset of the year. It helps us to recharge and rejuvenate and to get started on our next season together. This year, specifically January 1, 2021, we did a thing, and it was incredibly special and different. We renewed our vows. And so we did that in our home on January 1st with no guests. We just did it with our children watching, and our parents, our last remaining parents, and our pastor. And my pastor and his wife are both ordained pastors. They're doctors. Reverend Dr. Timothy Atkins Jones and Reverend Dr. Amy Atkins Jones did the service for us in our home. And it was emotional. It was special. It was anointed. It had so much meaning for us. I mean, if I think about this past year and all that we've experienced and all that we've seen in the wake of so much turmoil and incredible upheaval and challenge and sickness and death, that my husband would ask me to renew our vows and to reaffirm our life together at the 15-year mark of our wedding anniversary. It was so special for me. And I was so emotional about it. I didn't share it with anyone. I didn't tell anyone that we were going to do it. It was something that we kept private amongst us for 3 months. There was very little planning. You know, I wore a dress that I already had. I bought a fascinator to put on my hair. I had my hair curled. I didn't even take the time out to spend 3 or 4 hours in the hair salon. I just had my hair curled and pressed and pin curled. We all wore black because that was the theme, you know, for the event. I see the beauty and the regality in the color black. I see the mood and the power in the color black. And so it was important to me that our family showed up wearing black. And that really was the only theme besides love, black and love. And when you put that together, I think Black family and Black power and Black empowerment can be so important. And so that's how I spent my January 1st. And then I went on to spend my 44th birthday and my husband's 50th birthday celebrating. But in the middle of all of that, the world erupted again. And so the episodes that I had planned for this week, we are putting those on hold to just kind of bring in some voices, you know, that can kind of speak to the times in which we find ourselves yet again. I want to approach these episodes from 2 perspectives. For the first episode, I am bringing in Dr. Jason Johnson, Charles F. Coleman Jr., who's a civil rights attorney and friend. Dr. Jason Johnson is a political scientist and a commentator and associate professor at the great Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, which is my alma mater, and a historically Black college and university located in Baltimore, Maryland. Go Bears. And later in our discussion, another attorney, seasoned attorney, Midwin Charles of the Charles Law Firm in Brooklyn, also joins us to give us a few moments of weigh-in on where we find ourselves in America at this time. And I titled this episode, "This is America." And I did that because, you know, I've listened to a lot of the commentary and the discussion, and I've read the thought pieces and the think pieces, and I've heard from the thought leaders and listened to all of the commentators on MSNBC and CNN over the last few days. And I think it was incredibly comical what Fox News was doing this past week in the wake of all of this unrest. But I called it "This is America" because we often attempt to whitewash and dispel and distort is the word I want to use. We distort the legacy of this country. We distort the foundation of this country. We remove or we negate or we deny this country's truth when we say this is not who we are. And as much as I respect and believe that the leadership of our president-elect Joe Biden will be a measured leader presidency over the next 4 years, I do believe that he gets it wrong when he says that this is not who we are. In America, if you look at the foundation of this country, from inception to where we find ourselves in modern history, this is a huge part of who America has been. And the problem is that we continue to deny that America has this bloody, bludgeoning, defaming, antebellum history. We deny it. And unfortunately, it is now time. It's our reckoning in this country. 2021 is going to be a reckoning in this country. I saw a post recently that said the only difference 2021 is 2020 with bangs. And it's true, all over again. This year is coming in harder than even 2020 started. And it's doing that because we are at the end of a presidency that for the last 5 years has talked about the degradation of this nation. It has been vile. We've had a leader who has promoted xenophobia and racism and sexism. He's promoted these kinds of voices that would speak to white supremacy and white nationalism and embolden them. And we are now at the cusp point. We're at the cusp point. We're at the tipping off point in this country. We've reached an inflection. And so we cannot go forward not being real about where we are, not being real about what this country has been. Because Black Americans understand the totality and the weight and the truth of who America truly has been across its history. And so this conversation with these very thoughtful minds, I think, is important and necessary. And I'd like for you to just sit back, grab a drink, get on your treadmill, or maybe you're driving, whatever you're doing, be safe, and just take a listen at part 1, but also part 2, because I'm going to approach this from two different ideas. Part 1 with Dr. Jason Johnson, Charles Coleman, and Midwin Charles, coming up next, is about what we saw on January 6th. Part 2, we're going to talk about our corporations and our organizations and our companies and how we whitewash where we are in this country and how we take it back into our corporate centers and into our jobs and we sit with it and we ignore what it does to the American public and what it does specifically to Black and brown people to sit with these kinds of visual images and see this kind of vitriol in our nation's capital and across our history. So I hope you enjoy. I'm Sylvia Alston. This is Next Nation. And we're live. I'm gonna do my studious Oprah. I'm gonna start with my studious Oprah, but then I'm gonna get to a place where it's gonna get really Jersey, really Newark, because I'm really trying to understand what's happening in the world. But I want to start, with eloquence and invite two of my favorite Black men into the platform. We're here at Next Nation, where podcasts are heard. I'm here with my attorney, civil rights attorney, Charles Coleman Jr., and one of my favorite professors and political commentators, Dr. Jason Johnson, from the great Morgan State University. Go Bears. Go Bison too. We've got to be nice to
Thank you.
Really?
Thank you.
They already have VP Harris.
Everything.
We don't need to give them anything.
We don't need to give them anything else. We really don't. Okay, but gentlemen, here you are. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to be seen. Good to see you as well.
Listen, this is our first time getting together officially in 2021. It's nice to see. To see you.
Happy New Year. Can we say that?
Yeah, we can. Happy New Year? We should.
Is it happy?
No. What I'm saying is that it's under review.
Right.
Pending. Happy New Year pending.
I heard somebody was tweeted as like, 2021, I've already done my free 7-day trial, and I want to send it back.
And then I saw somebody respond to that tweet by saying, "We're so sorry that you had this experience. If we credited your account $2,000, would you consider taking us back?"
Listen, the first 7 days of the year have been insane. Like honestly and literally insane. All right, let's jump into it because this is a special edition. I had absolutely no intention on talking to you gentlemen this week, but the week that has been so crazy. Already I said I gotta call my boys and see if we can kind of just debrief on what is going on. And here's the thing. I thought 2020 literally was going to be not that I really thought we were going to turn a major corner, but I honestly thought there was a dawn upon us, and apparently not. We are at the intersection of hell and frozen over. What's happening, guys? This past week, what have we seen?
I think we have seen America. We have seen Americans America as much as we can. And what I mean by that is all of the elements that are inherent within America's DNA have been very cleanly and very clearly on display. White supremacy, white entitlement, violence, all of those things have been violence and perversion of democracy. All of those things have been cleanly and clearly on display. And what I think we saw yesterday was I did some conversation on a different platform, and I said that what we witnessed was the juncture of our political ills, our cultural ills, and our societal ills come sort of square faced with one another in the same cauldron and boil over. And I'll go over very, very quickly what I mean by that. From a cultural place, we have become increasingly polarized over the past 8 years to 12 years in a way that has really gone afoul of anything resembling discord that's reasoned. We have lost our way in terms of being able to disagree without being disagreeable, and that ship has long since sailed. And so I think culturally that was, if anything else, put on very clear display in terms of the impetus for what we saw yesterday and how it played out. I think from a society standpoint, I'm going to be very clear and very candid about this. I think there's a lot of blame that needs to be that needs to go around because, quite frankly, America created this, and the media in America, in a lot of ways, enabled this because this was brewing for a number of years. And I told people in 2016 and 2015, I said, Trump is a difficult cover for the media. And I had journalists tell me stuff like, nah, because it's just going to require folks to double down on their investigative journalism. And I was like, nah, you're not understanding what I'm saying to you.
Yeah.
It's not about facts. It's about the fact that facts do not matter to his base. And so on one level, Trump has been TV and ratings gold. And media got to a point where they didn't know or realize how deep down that rabbit hole they had actually got in terms of being in bed with him in that way. And then you get a situation like yesterday, which is the offshoot of that. So that's societally how it's been a problem. And then politically, there's so much blame to go around because there are so many people who allowed false equivalencies to be created between the idea of white nationalism and other respected and established political ideologies. And they allowed it to take place without saying anything, without objecting, without calling it out on its face. I don't give a damn about people in the cabinet resigning now because you knew what this was 4, 5, 6 years ago. You knew what it was. GOP leadership. You knew what it was, right? And you let this happen. And you allowed this rhetoric. You allowed yourself to make excuses. Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz. I don't want to hear any of that from any of y'all because you knew what this was and you refused to have the balls to step up and say what it is. So from those three angles, this juncture of like toxicity was in the same pot on high. and it boiled over yesterday, and that's what we saw.
Listen, Black people have been saying for 4 or 5 years that this was coming. We knew it. We knew it. We could see it historically. We've seen this recipe before. There was the perfect mixture of rhetoric and hate speak, and people who people who adhere to their Second Amendment rights, and people who were getting more and more attention in the media, getting more and more exposure through social media, the networks. Fox News has been a cesspool of throwing this kind of bull around for the last 5 years. We knew this was coming. We didn't know when, but we knew. And honestly, yesterday morning, I texted my partners at 9 a.m. and I said, I am expecting a coup. Who wants to put a wager on it? And by 11:30,
yep,
it was already starting.
On and popping.
I could feel it.
Look,
Trump has been saying since December 19th that this was coming. So I don't understand why anybody was surprised. Where was the staffing?
Yeah.
Where were the police? Why didn't you know that you needed to be covering this, that you needed to be on guard, that you needed to be prepared? There was absolutely, nothing in order, nothing in place. It was a perfect disaster waiting to happen, Jason.
So it's an inside job.
For sure.
Like that's the thing. It's an inside job. Like I was landing yesterday. I was flying in from Atlanta, and I intentionally flew into BWI because I had a feeling. I was like, I don't know what's going to happen in DC today. Now, DC traffic out of Reagan is bad enough, but I thought there might be roadblocks and everything else like that. But it's the same thing that we saw all summer. It's not just the Black people have been talking about this. It's like, I always say it's that old 60s chant, the cops and the Klan go hand in hand.
Right.
How many videos did we see last summer during the protests of cops, high-fiving Kyle Rittenhouse and beating the crap out of innocent protesters? Dylan Roof shot up a church and killed one of my oldest friends, and he got a Big Mac. He got Burger King out of it. We've seen this over and over again. The police are complicit. The police are supporting. The police are insiders. And I'll go so far as to say this. It's not just me. There's a reason that, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi is like, yo, the head of the Capitol Police needs to be fired. She wouldn't say that if she just thought this was a mismanagement issue. Okay. Donna Edwards, former member of Congress. I was just on the air with her. Donna Edwards is like, look, and even I know this. I don't know if you guys ever have, but you want to see a lost face. You want to see a grown man or woman look like a 5-year-old lost in the mall. Tell somebody to find their way around the Capitol. Okay, that building is a labyrinth. It's not the White House. It's really hard and confusing, and it's old walls and old buildings. These people were marching through there like they had a roadmap. And where were they going? How did they find Nancy Pelosi's office?
It was an episode of Designated Survivor. I swear to God, they had the entire building cased.
Do you know how difficult it is? And I'm saying this as somebody who's worked on the Hill. Do you know how difficult it is to find the Speaker's office?
Yes.
And I worked there for years.
Yes.
Like, it is not like you walk in and you make a quick left and then another.
Right.
Nah, son.
No.
It's not like that. So, it is.
I want to add this because this is
the
key thing. This was brought to my attention by Ellie Mistel. If you guys know him, he's a great, brilliant writer.
Ellie.
He's a lawyer. Ellie is great. Ellie was pointing it out, and this goes along with what Donna Edwards says. He's like, look, man, this was a heist. Why is it that they went to, and think about this, these are right wingers. They didn't go to Ilhan Omar's office. They didn't go to AOC's office. They went to Pelosi's office, and they went and ransacked the parliamentarian's office. They were trying to destroy the documentation of the electoral vote. You don't come up with that plan from the outside.
No.
Somebody on staff, some cop, somebody is telling you where to go. Because I am a very smart man and a political scientist. That never would have occurred to me. But these people made a beeline.
It's not just
the
cops.
Parliamentarians' offices.
It's not just the cops, Jason. It's not just the cops. You cannot make me believe that this group of Americans know the internal of how the government works. You cannot make me believe it. There was 30,000 pairs of Wranglers Okay. And
I want credit
cowboy
for my
boots.
joke. I want
Okay.
credit for my joke because I said, when was the last time there was this many playing Wrangler jeans on the Capitol?
Listen, studded boots. Okay.
Mhm.
The makeup, the cowboy hats,
bedazzled t-shirts.
the bedazzled t-shirts. Did you see the cross? Did you see the cross?
Did you see the noose?
Yeah.
Did you see the noose?
Yeah. The Confederate flag. I mean, there was so much symbolism of hatred. And what this was a return to antebellum. This was a return to a historical period that has always been to torment, okay, a certain faction and a certain demographic of people. This was so well orchestrated. There's no possible way that this doesn't go all the way up the chain of command.
But here's the question that I have, and I have this question, Jason as a political scientist, and me as someone who has a degree in political science and has never done anything with it.
Hey, you worked in the Capitol, man. It's better than
I guess that's fair.
A tourist.
That's fair. My question is, and this is a relatively serious question. If we are looking at this in the lens, beyond the lens of what we already knew about America, right? What does this tell us about the tone and tenor of where our mentality is, primarily because, now granted, it was only 30,000 people, right? But Sylvia, what you just said made me think about a lot of different things, right? So you had your conservative flag wavers, right?
The symbolism was there.
The symbolism was there, right? You had your Confederate flag people. Then you had you one would have to assume that you had some anti-immigrant folks, right? I saw a group of, strangely enough, amputees and differently able folks who were there arguing on behalf of Medicare, and keeping that going. And so I guess my thing is, from a policy standpoint, is there any common theme to be drawn from that? Because like a BLM rally is clear. It's Black Lives Matter, right? Like, so what is the common takeaway? We've talked about hatred, but everybody was there in a different, without saying everybody, but a lot of people were there in different capacities. So what's the takeaway there?
The takeaway is white nationalism. And I always try and tell people, you have to understand the difference between white nationalism and white supremacy. White supremacy is just the idea that white people should run things and white people should, basically be in control, and it's an attitude and it's a belief system, right? But white supremacy actually has very designated spaces for non-white people. They're there for entertainment. They're there for carnal pleasure. They're there to abuse. I mean, white supremacy is a mindset. It's also a mindset that many Black people end up having to adopt by default by living in this country. But white nationalism is different. White nationalism is the idea that nobody other than straight white men and a few select women should have any direct control over the functioning of the government, the economy, or education. It is a very specific ideology, right? So white nationalists are basically saying, and white nationalists who are part of the Republican Party are saying, look, any politician that is elected by a coalition composed of Black, brown, and tan people is not legitimate. Because those people are not legitimate participants in democracy. So that's the thing. They're white nationalists. And I always tell people, you have to understand the difference between, it's like, oh, it's white supremacy. There's tons of white supremacists. We've had white supremacy all along, but white nationalism says that you can't vote.
So Jason, I'm curious, how much of that do you see as choosing to, because a lot of people were saying, and I did see interviews with folks who were saying, like, we don't believe that the election was stolen just because Trump told us, right? So like, how much of it do you see as we just bought Trump's narrative that this election was not legitimate because it was stolen, versus what you sort of just described was the election was not legitimate because the hundreds of thousands of mail-in ballots and absentee ballots and things like that that came from Black and brown people, if you will,
it was clear
those don't count.
They almost said it. They almost said it. Yeah.
You can't separate the two.
You cannot.
You can't separate the two, because at the end of the day, the fact that those ballots were sent in by Black people in their mind makes them illegitimate.
It validates them.
It's the same thing that you saw. It's like what you saw with birtherism and Barack Obama.
Yeah.
If you talk to people, what they would eventually admit, I was at Red State Conference, I've been to CPAC, what you would eventually get people to admit, if you can get them a conversation, is they would say, I just can't believe that the majority of the country voted for this guy. It's just a core belief. So everything afterwards is just coming up with factoids and rumors and theories to justify what you believe. They cannot believe that Joe Biden won the presidency. They cannot believe that Donald Trump didn't get enough votes. So they will come up with a theory to make that make sense. And at the end of the day, this is the other thing to remember. There's a difference between people who believe that and people who are willing to exploit those who believe it. That's
absolutely.
Yeah. And that's what we saw in Congress.
For sure. But here's the thing. I think you made a great point that I don't want to walk away from. You said most straight white men and some white women. I think that gives a great context for the woman that we saw, the first woman that we saw lose her life in the wake of this riot, right? And let's call this what this was. This was not a protest, okay?
A terror attack.
This was a domestic terror attack. These were rioters. These were insurrectionists, okay? They were sent to the Capitol by the President of the United States to disrupt, okay? To tear down, to disrupt democracy. That's what they were sent for. So when they got there, and they did the work that they were instructed to do, I was not surprised by the fallout. As a matter of fact, seeing the cops run upstairs, there was a Black police officer, and I don't know whether or not either one of you saw this, but
I saw it. He was by himself. He was basically
by himself. He was a lone Black police officer, and he addressed them. He picked up a stick as he was running up steps, but he ran from them. And I said to myself, as I was watching that, I said, this Black officer knows, had that crowd been Black, he would have fired upon that crowd.
Of course.
Because he would have known that he could get away with shooting into that crowd. He would have been a hero. A Black officer could not fire upon that white squad without being prosecuted. And he realized that it was almost like an aha moment. A cloud popped over his head while he was standing there watching them. And he said, I can't deal with this. Let me run upstairs and get away from him. But that white woman... they would have killed him. The rest of them would have killed him. And that's what I'm saying. This is the Second Amendment crowd. This is 38,000 Second Amendment-ers. Okay?
The only objection that I have to that one is I agree with everything except for he would have fired on that Black cop would have fired on Black officers. I want to have a little bit of faith to say that it's questionable that he would have that Black cop would have fired on Black people. I 100% believe and agree that he knew that the consequences would be different. And I absolutely believe that it was the threat of consequence that made him decide not to fire on that group of white rioters. I will say that I'm like, I watched that brother. I watched his body language. I don't think he wanted to shoot anybody. I really don't think he wanted to shoot anybody, but I think he knew he could not shoot them white folk. I think he knew that. So that's the only thing that's my only little sort of like,
for sure.
But he definitely knew consequence-wise that,
if he fired into that crowd, he might not even make it to trial, not even make it to. If he pulls out
on them,
they would have annihilated him. They're
going to get me, and ain't nobody going to do anything about it.
And I also want to add, let's be clear, like, this is the thing, and I just said this on the air in another program. There was the only reason the police wouldn't respond that way is because of a fear of consequence. Because in Washington, D.C., it's a federal city. So every crime committed essentially is federal.
Federal, yeah.
Okay. Every single person in that building was breaking the law. So at that point, you could do whatever you want to them.
Right.
But this was not a question of like, oh, are they over the line? Are they this, that, the other? No. If they're in the building. I mean, Charles, you know this. You can't get past security without 5 badges.
They ain't on the guest list. They ain't on the guest list.
Like, come on.
Right.
You know, like,
For sure.
so if they're already on the stairs, look, I don't have to be an expert to know. I've seen Olympus Has Fallen. I've seen White House Down. I know how you're supposed to deal with this stuff. They would have opened fire. Like, and the only reason you don't open fire is because you think they'll kill you.
You're outnumbered.
Yeah, I question the utility of how violence could have been engaged to neutralize that threat. And I've been pondering this question since last night. I mean, obviously, as Black people, we know that if this were, 30 Black people who decided, let alone 30,000 that decided to do this, that violence would have been among the very first methods employed. But given what we were watching,
and how long did you watch it? Because I couldn't turn away from it.
So for me, my experience was different. I was actually doing a training with a client that started. I logged on at 12:40, and then I didn't get off until almost like 2:30, 3 o'clock. I got off at like 3 o'clock, and I looked at my phone, and it was like fucking bedlam. Like I looked at my phone, I was like, wait. People were like, are you, I got so many texts like, are you seeing this? Are you watching this? And I was like,
Charles, are you in DC?
I'm in New York.
Okay. Because I was getting those because people didn't know where I was.
Yeah,
I was getting like, yo,
California.
are you in the city? Or are you in the city?
Yeah, you've been in California, right?
But I want to say this though, really quickly though, in terms of geography and location. One story that the news has not been able to cover that we need to be mindful of, and I have it in conversation with my folks in movement spaces and civil rights spaces. There has been different continued acts of violence against Black people across the country that occurred yesterday. And so we as a community have to remain vigilant and have to remain mindful that like there was low-key coordinated efforts in different places in terms of just different spats of violence that were in line with what was going on in DC. And of course, we are already in the middle of a global pandemic. We are already in the middle of being in America and the continued challenging existence that we have dealt with as part of that. But now in this space, while the focus of the news has been on DC, and understandably so, there are groups of people who are looking to enact violence against people of color under the same banner, in connection to these sort of satellite and remote occurrences. So even though I was in New York, I did get texts from folks like, stay your ass inside. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, please be careful.
I think Black people universally had that conversation. Wherever you were, universally we had that conversation because we weren't sure.
We was like, stand by, stand back, and stand
down. Right.
And I want to add to this because this is the thing. Like when they were saying that they were overwhelmed or where they weren't prepared, I was like, if there was this level of internet chatter on Black Twitter and blah, 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 they would have been arresting people at the airport. They would have been arresting people on the subway. The reason that we don't see these kinds of things in our community is because they stop us before we get started. How many times, I'm sure this has happened with you guys, how many times were you in like a march or a protest in college, and by the time you get to the student union, how the hell are there 12 cops here? Because every single time there's a snitch, there's somebody embedded. When there's Black Lives Matter, there's somebody embedded. When it's Antifa, there's somebody embedded. You can't tell me that they didn't have cops embedded in this movement. There had to be.
I saw more security. I've seen more security at a Howard Homecoming Yard Fest than I saw on the. I'm actually dead ass. Like,
listen, no. There's been more security at my church annual reunion. Okay, this was ridiculous.
Walmart on Black Friday.
Yeah, and the idea that.
But it wasn't just the fact that there was no security. It was the benevolence of the security that was present.
It's twofold.
The body language, the watching how they were in response to them, their movements, they're standing to the side.
There were people taking selfies.
There were selfies being taken.
I saw a video where after just being egged on. After a while, it was a group of officers. They just moved the barricades.
Move the barricades out of the way. No, they were stomping cameras. The officers were taking pictures. They were laughing. They were bringing water. It was absolutely insane.
I said those mother effers look like they was at a winter carnival. Because that's exactly what it is. I mean,
it was a love fest. It was a fucking love fest.
To Jason's point, though, there's a second piece to that, right? In terms of the actual, there's no way that you can believe that this was such a massive failure of the Capitol Police without this being an inside job, not only because of the intelligence that everyone had going into the day, right? But because this was not a random Wednesday.
Right.
We knew what was happening on that day. It's almost the closest thing that I could think of off the top of my head is oral arguments in a Supreme Court case about abortion or affirmative action. Something's happening on that day. Right. So what's on the calendar, right? Yep. So internally, you already know there's the potential for some shit. Mm-hmm. Now you have external information that people are coming into town. People are here. And it wasn't like first of all, they didn't show up on Wednesday. They had been there
all weekend. Because you had hotels complaining about their behavior. You had the airline stewards union saying, hey, we don't want these people on the plane.
So you knew these people were in town and you knew what they was in town for. Like, I'm sorry, the Kenny Chesney concert was canceled.
Right. But and I'll also add this. When you talk about consequences.
I love the references though. We've got the references. We've got the Wranglers. We've got the study cowboy boots.
We know it. We know it because we gotta know it, right? We gotta read context clues. Like if we're in a situation, we gotta be like, the jeans, Kenny Chesney. Stop the steal. Oh, I gotta get the fuck out of here. We gotta be able to see that shit. Like, hold on, I'm in the wrong place.
We need a quick break. We'll be right back. And when we come back, I want to set up the conversation about the woman who was killed. The Air Force veteran, Abby. What was her last name, Jason?
Abby Albert. It was something.
Abby Albert. We'll be right back.
I'm Noah.
And I'm Ava.
And you're listening to our mom,
Sylvia K. Alston, on Next Nation, the podcast. Yes, sir.
We're back. There was a 35-year-old woman, Air Force veteran from San Diego, who flew to D.C. to be involved in the protests. There have now since been video recordings released of some of her rants in response to the times that we're in, how she feels about this new president and vice president. And her name was Ashley Babbitt. She was killed. What's so unfortunate about this situation is I was watching the coverage all day. I was home, as most of us are. I was working. The TV was on. I was in disbelief for most of it, and I said to my husband, I said, somebody's gonna get hurt. Like the tenor, the tone, and the temperament of this crowd, somebody is definitely gonna get hurt. And it's probably gonna happen soon. And literally about 10 minutes later, they come rolling a white woman bleeding out of her neck and chest, with her eyes open, showing her chest exposed. And it literally, it wasn't shocking to me, but it was very unfortunate. We are roping into the conversation Midwin Charles. She's joining us from, I don't know, her perch somewhere in Brooklyn, USA. Midwin.
Hi.
We got you in finally.
Hi, how are you?
We're
hey,
here.
Jason, Charles, how are you guys?
How's it going?
Good.
Thanks for joining us. We are talking about Ashley Babbitt and the killing of Ashley Babbitt. We do not know all of the details, but we do know that there's been like manifestos all over her social media about how she felt about this government. I wanted to get your context or your thoughts about, just some of the stories we're starting to hear about the people who lost their life at the rally. And in our final minutes, talk about the responsibility that this president bears to the loss of life, and where we go from here. We're talking the 25th Amendment now. There's so much, conversation happening. Where do we go from here? And we've got a few days left before this presidency officially ends. Do you honestly think that he should be removed from office? Do we let this play out? And what's the legacy here in our final minutes?
I mean, I think he should be removed from office. I mean, you cannot incite violence as president of the United States and not face any consequences. I know we only have 14 days, and I know the probability of being successful with the 25th Amendment removal or an impeachment is going to be difficult. But the fact that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi today are talking that language is what I had been advocating for the past 4 years, for the longest, which is, where is the smoke? You cannot allow this president who practically commits an impeachable offense on a weekly basis. I mean, just 4 days ago, we were talking about how he was on the phone with the Secretary of State of Georgia and
fined him 11,780 votes.
Right. I mean, election interference, conspiracy to commit fraud, a voter fraud, like all of the above. Like Nancy could have said, we want to impeach him the next day. So the fact that we got here is partly because the Democrats have not been holding Trump and this administration's feet to the fire.
Well, I think they're not. I don't necessarily believe that it's not because they're not holding their feet to the fire. I think they felt like up to now they didn't have the numbers to get it done, and that the Republicans would never
matter. See, that's where I disagree. It doesn't matter. You still have to show. You still have to bring the smoke, even if you aren't successful. Like, nowhere is it written that if someone violates a rule, a law, or a regulation, that you don't go after him because you may not get the outcome that you want. You still have to send the message that what the person did is wrong.
It's vehemently wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, it's vehemently wrong. And by failing to do that and just give him a pass and give him a pass and give him a pass, you're just kicking the ball down the can. And you're emboldening him. You're emboldening him. And that's why we've seen him get more and more bold over the past 4 years.
So I think that there's arguments on both sides. I think that the notion of him being emboldened and arguably enabled by the lack of accountability that he's been held to has definitely been a factor in what has gotten us here. I talked about that a little bit earlier. But I also think that from my perspective, Schumer and Pelosi don't get to come in as like cowboys in the bottom of the 11th inning and then now say like, yo, we want to bring some smoke now. I'm not trying to hear that, right? Like, I think that for them to talk tough at this point is corny. I mean, we've already seen enough. We did not need to see this. The fact that we've seen it is obviously probably the most egregious thing that we have seen politically play out in our lifetimes. But nevertheless, I think that that's an empty gesture that is like a little foolish in my opinion, only because from a levity standpoint, I think the party, if they're thinking about the party and its longevity, they took a lot of L's under Donald Trump. Like, he hoed them in our speed. Like, he hoed the Democratic Party like repeatedly, like throughout the 4 years. So to come back now and do that from where I'm from, we would call that some sucker shit.
I think who's been consistent the last 4 years? Congresswoman Maxine Waters has been consistent.
Yeah, she's been consistent.
She's been consistent. She's been banging the drum, and people thought that she was insane, But I will say, in terms of bottom of the 11th, my only disagreement there is that now we've had septuagenarians and octogenarians sitting underneath their desks, hiding in their offices because, the cowboys in them are, they got the full cavalry inside the building. It's a little bit different. They are now walking Nancy Pelosi's mail around DC, like reading her mail, feet up on her desk. I'm sure she's had to sanitize her office. I understand why there might be a little more, angst or a little more depth in her voice now when she calls for us to invoke the 25th Amendment. I get it a little bit. Jason.
Well, and I also think it's also just about the raw numbers of who do you have in power, right? Like now they're going to control the House, they're going to control the Senate. So it's a slightly more situation. And you can only say it with your chest, but so much when you don't run anything, right? Like now they're going to potentially they're potentially going to have the White House, the House, and the Senate for who knows how long, right? And at this point, you probably won't have any party switching. Like usually if there's a 50-50 split, somebody's like, yo, I'm going to run to the other side. I don't think you're going to have any Democrats join the Republicans after a 50-50 split, because at this point, you'd basically just be joining the insurrectionist party. But what I will say is this, and I think this is important to understand when you talk about like what the next steps need to be. I don't think Joe Biden started his campaign saying, hey, Charlottesville inspired me. We got to restore the soul of America. I don't think Joe's about that life. I never have. I don't think he is now. I don't think the selection of, if Kristen Clark had been his AG or Vanita Gupta, I'd have been like, okay,
right.
But he picked Merrick Garland.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That does not inspire me to think they're going to go after these people with the kind of aggression that they need. And I want to be really clear about this from, it's a political, I'm not a historian. I always say I'm a political scientist, but there is no precedent anywhere on planet Earth. There's no country you can show me where allowing a leader who attempted a coup to stay in power to stay in your country ends up well. If Donald Trump, the moment he leaves office, I don't care if you're talking about Museveni or Saddam Hussein or Papa Doc, I don't care who you're talking about. Right. They have to hit this man with so many charges the moment he leaves the White House that he has to flee to another country that doesn't have extradition. Because
I think Tish James is ready for that ass. Just to
but I mean,
answer
she
your
can't
question.
be the only one. She can't be the only one.
Listen, do you know who else is ready for that ass? Carl Racine.
Well, I mean, but he also, it's got to be the feds too. It's got to be, they got to hit his kids and be like, look, we're about to go after your dad, Don Jr. Now, if he wants to go live the rest of his life in St. Petersburg, that's fine. Do you want to join him? Otherwise, you're going to have to turn over some information. Donald Trump can't be allowed to stay in the United States as a free, unrestrained citizen after attempting his second coup that we know about. Okay, this is the one. We don't know how many other phone calls to secretaries of state we've made. We don't know how many other third world leaders he's called to try and pull stunts. We don't know, but you can't have somebody like that running free in the country, because I know they ain't got the heart to put him in jail. So you're going to have to make America so unpleasant that he leaves. Otherwise, we're going to face this every 6 months for the next 4 years.
Not only that, you can't have somebody like him start a media company, which we know that is what Trump is going to do the minute he steps out of office.
I think that's the real danger in terms of the takeaway from this. I think that what he was able to do was he was able to, and I think mainstream media largely underestimated his capability here, is that he was able to create a space where not a majority, right, but a significant number of Americans were distrustful enough of the news and mainstream news outlets that they would come and at least, reference it against whatever he was saying. Maybe they didn't believe everything he said, but he did enough where he was able to discredit mainstream news where they didn't trust that either. And so now you get to a point where it's like, I don't necessarily know who I believe. I kind of sort of may mess with him on this a little bit. And so this whole cycle and whirlwind of dis and misinformation among a population that, quite frankly, is not necessarily the most well-educated to begin with, created this huge, inferno of a firestorm. And what the danger behind him having a media company is that will continue, and that will only multiply and become amplified, and that's extremely problematic.
We're running low on time. I do want to say this, and I hate to give Trump any credit for anything, but I will say that he is a master communicator. I've studied speech throughout my life. It was my major. And one of the things that I will say is that if you look at any of the greats, going back to Aristotle, it doesn't matter if you're lying. If you keep repeating it, if you keep saying it, if you keep driving it home over and over and over and over, you are going to manipulate the crowd. And he's a master communicator, and he has manipulated the crowd since 2015 when he first initiated his campaign, starting the conversation about Mexicans. He has been preaching xenophobia, racism, sexism, division since the start. And that message and that mantra over and over and over and over again, it has raised the flag and opened up the ears of enough people. And I don't think that they are just going to go away now that Joe Biden is president. I will say that.
Of course not. But let me also say that what makes him a master communicator, which I think is a skill set, is being able to know what your people want to hear. Remember, it wasn't just that he repeated nonsense. He didn't repeat random things. He repeated exactly what they wanted to hear. And you're talking about a group of people that have been primed and prepped for decades by right-wing media, Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, Fox News, there's Sean Hannity. There's so many of them that have been priming this base with a particular view on things. Patriotism, Second Amendment. There's certain key things that have always been ripe for the picking, and he's aware of that. And that's why anytime something happened in the country, he would be like, for example, when Colin Kaepernick took a knee, it was like patriotism. Like, he knows exactly what it is that triggers them and what they want to hear. And that's what I think is really his skill set. And then when you add the fact that he just keeps repeating it and repeating it and repeating it, right? The anti-immigrant rhetoric. If you listen to conservative radio for the last 20 years, that's what they're about. He just picked up on that. And that's why the Obama is not from here was so successful. And that's what he would do. He would call into Fox News almost every day. They loved it. And every time he would call in, it would be like, yeah, he's not from here. It's stoking that anti-immigrant rhetoric that had been around for decades in the Republican Party and in the base, and had been amplified by right-wing radio. So he isn't new in terms of these ideas, but he's new in terms of understanding how to say exactly what it is that they want to hear.
We're out of time, guys. Part 2 coming soon. Thank you.
Next Nation, the podcast, would like to thank Sphere Podcast Studios in Houston, Texas, under the direction of Gary Lee. Our creative launch team, Latif Harris, Devon Warren, Emo Rice, Tiffany Thompson, Tanisha Malone, Hugh Cardis. Music production by Jean-Pierre Zephyr. My writing coach, Linda Jones of The Writing Doula. Spiritual leader, Reverend Timothy Atkins Jones. And finally, my family, my husband and associate producer, James J. Alston. Thank you, honey, for all of your love and support of this effort. My mom, Shirley K. Mommy, I love you forever and always. And finally, my children, Noah and Ava Alston, who also act as junior producers for Next Nation, the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you soon.